Hey guys, happy Halloween to ya, and welcome back to the Timeline Show, where, in honor of this time of year, I thought I would go over the Omen timeline. Now, the Omen is a supernatural horror film about a boy called Damien, who we learn is the son of Satan. The original film came out in 1976. Opens with the birth of Damien in 1971, and then jumps ahead for a series of mini jumps to 1976, the year of the film's release, showing us Damien's 5th birthday, and this is where all of the supernatural horror stuff begins to happen. Now, the film stars Lee Remick as Kathy Thorne, Gregory Peck as Robert Thorne, and little Harvey Stevens as Damien Thorne. And the second Doctor himself, Patrick Troughton, plays Father Brennan, the Catholic priest at the hospital at the time of Damien's birth. Now, of course, at the beginning of the film, the reason the Thorns end up with Damien is because he's switched at birth with their baby. And of course, nobody would suspect a 5-year-old as a killer. Okay, now, this is to do with the timeline of the series. So, I'm not going to tell you the ending of The Omen in case you haven't seen it yet. 1978 then rolls by, and they give us Damien Omen 2, which actually takes place in the year of its release, 1978. Damien is now 12 years old. He's living with his aunt and uncle and cousin, his Uncle Richard, his Aunt Anne, and his cousin Mark. And he and Mark are off to military school. And this is where all the crazy supernatural stuff starts to happen for this installment. So, yes, it takes place. Now, this is where we're given a timeline discrepancy. It takes place 7 years after the original film, which takes place in 1976. This film takes place in 1978, so that would make it take place 2 years after the original. Not 7. Damien should only be 7 years old here, not 12. Unless you're suggesting that the opening of the first film, in order to have this making sense, now takes place in 1966. The opening of the first film. And the main story now takes place in 1971. So, when did it take place then? And you think the timeline gets confusing there. In 1981, we are given Omen 3, The Final Conflict, which jumps ahead 20 years to 1998 in terms of the timeline setting. Damien Thorne is now 32 years old and is in charge of Thorne Industries, so he's got everything that he was set to inherit. Inherited it a lot faster than he should have. So, okay. And the supernatural stuff starts happening pretty much straight away for this installment. So, timeline discrepancies again. The film takes place in 1998. Damien is 32 years old. No, that would still place his birth in 1966. So, this follows on nicely from the end of the 1966 timeline. Now, the discrepancies only start to make less sense here, because just this year, in 2024, we got a prequel, The First Omen, which is actually about Damien's mum, and the date on the screen clearly states that it's set in 1971, not 1966. So Damien's birth was in 1971. The main story of the first film takes place in 76. So that means in order to have the last two films on the timeline making any chronological sense, ignore the date of 1978 for the setting of the second film. Because 7 years after 1976 is 1983, not 1978. And ignore the date of 1998 for Omen 3, The Final Conflict, because 20 years after that would be 1993, not 1998. Otherwise, Damien should be 37 years old. Heck no. He shouldn't. If he's 32 in that film, and he was born in 1971, then the film should take place in 2003. Otherwise, he should only be 22 years old in the third film. Not 32. Unless the third film, now chronologically the fourth, suggests he was born in 1956. No, because that would make him 42 by the third film. Yeah, it's all confusing. So let's just say, to make this timeline make any chronological sense, we believe the date of 1971 for the first Omen to take place. That's when Damien was born. That's when that film takes place. We lock that in. And we believe the 1976 date for the setting of the original film. Damien's 5 years old in that. So we lock those dates in. Now, we shift the timeline ahead to 1983 for the second film, to have that making any type of chronological sense for Damien to be 12 years old. Now, for him to be 32, and to have it making any sense in the final conflict, we move the timeline back 5 years to 1993. Which would make him 32 according to the timeline set for us in the first Omen. So that's that sorted. Otherwise, it's a confusing timeline. Otherwise, you'd have to believe. Ignore the 1971 date for the first Omen. Push that back 5 years, or bring it forward 5 years to 1966. Then have the setting of the original film in 1971. Set then the timeline to 1978 for the second film and 1998 for the third. Which is what I think they meant to do. And it's because they didn't do that that we ended up with a confusing mess of a timeline. So, chronologically confused over the Omen timeline. Okay. We're going to stop talking about that now. And let's just go by the timeline set in the first Omen. 1971. That's when Damien would have been born as well. Then the events of the first film, 1976. 1983 for the events of the second film. And let's just say the 20 years is a ballpark figure. It's actually set 25 years later. So Damien should be 37. No. It's just 1993 then for the second film, for the third film, and he's 32. So, next time, guys, the timeline won't be as confusing. And well, you will have to wait and see what it's going to be on. Until then, though, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have us a magical time. And once again, happy Halloween!